Hello all. This is a short video about breaking the distance aka Zu Fechten, going to fence in English. Unfortunately, there are several ways to understand how it translates into actions. The main dependencies is what the sword can do and what protection our opponent is wearing.
To reliably go through 32 layers of medium-heavy cloth, about 380 GSM. We need a sword with a thin, sharp, relatively broad tip like the Type 13A. As well, we need to use a shoulder-powered cut.
Against 16 layers, most of the swords will cut, provided we use a tip cut powered by the shoulders. Hitting at the katana soft spot produces similar results. Finishing the cut as a slice helps, but it is not technically necessary. Using a biomechanically supported elbow strike, or punch strike, will produce the same results. Even a less powerful version of that managed to go through the 16 layers. Even when shoulder-powered, striking around the center of percussion will not reliably produce a cut that would be significant enough. However, the concussive power of the blow is enough that it cannot be absorbed by the textile armor and so remains an option that can't be ignored tactically. The same can be said for a katana. Bearing in mind that like all sword with an adequate edge profile, adding a slice part at the end of the cut will produce effective cut. For elbow cuts with the COP, it is the same at about 8 layers. So the space from where we are potentially exposed is a combination of what the sword can do against what we and our opponent are wearing. Bearing in mind that wrist cut, slashes or slices are very effective against naked flesh, especially throat and hands. This distance, about 3 meters, is the we can effectively reach with a tip cut after taking 2 normal steps or a large one. Since the target is waiting for us in a guard, Zu Fechten is covering the distance between the 2 stones. If the sword tip is not that nimble, long-range fast attack are not that practical, so Zu Fechten is reduced to its simple expression. In this case, it translates to both sides taking a half step to either get the sword in motion or get it ready for the strike. Another way to look at it is that we both get into measure. As the typical manual case, I see that he getting into Vontag, so I zwirch him as he is getting into the guard and before he strikes, i.e. a nachrazen and a strike in the vor. If the opponent breach the distance, we can use the Zorhn to counter him, even if he is throwing the point. Basically, we have enough time to recognize the attack and change our taking of a guard into a Zorhn, which is really a biomechanically supported elbow strike. The benefits is shoulder-level power in a faster elbow-based delivery, supported by an advantageous body structure. This is the nachrazen when we are in des. For sword that are lighter or have much more nimble point and or when we are wearing light clothing. Stepping into distance, aka the first step of the Zu Fechten, as we arm the strike is not as safe as it was in the previous case. As this one-handed strike demonstrate. Whilst not necessarily the most sensible application of that strike. It shows the gap that was not present in the previous shoulder strikes from the baddie. So, we might want a more normalized entrance. Streichen will provide enough cover for the Zu Fechten, be it from Alber or Schrankhut. We are breaking the distance, aka Zu Fechten, with Alber. We then redirect his strike with a streichen. Since he used a shoulder strike, we have plenty of time to strike. Same as before, but the baddie is sending the point. We have less time, but the streichen get us into Vontag anyway. We have passed the point and we are in a posture to support our strike. Same as before, but the baddie is striking one-handed and we start in Schrankhut. Even if the baddie times his attack for when we are at the final phase of the streichen. Since the streichen is really a strike to prepare the Zorn as we get closer. We can still counter him with a Zorn, more or less as we would normally. Now if Zu Fechten is that neat, why do not we see it mentioned in manuals from different traditions or different weapons? I think it is kind of based on having a difference between the edge of the practical range and the range we want to be in to use our fencing style. In short, we can describe other systems in KDF terms, though it might introduce a superfluous level of granularity. Reciprocally, other systems due to weapons, level of clothing and how each author conceptually organizes the system, might not be the need to fully flesh out the concept. Fundamentally, in KDF, we need to be about 2 meters away and using a powerful strike, so that we will end up at the worst 50-50 in the bind. Ideally, the baddie will be weak or overcommit. This is that his point will end up offline, though if that does not happen we do have options to deal with that. In effect, and conceptually this is not different from Gigante using counterguard to get into measure. For the length of weapons we use and assuming we need a shoulder cut to go through clothing. Unless there is an element of surprise from that kind of distance, we are not very likely to be successful. Regardless, the normal defense will enough to deal with the situation. If we wanted to use KDF vocabulary to describe what happens, Zu Fechten would only start around 2.5 meters. Now, as we can see in the rest of the plays, everything kinds of start at that range anyway. I.e., the practical maximum range and the range we want to fence from is the same. If the system is not really based on getting into a specific position to deliver a specific strike, but focused on the cross we are getting and our relative position to our opponent, the maximum effective range is de facto the fencing range. In this segment we cut into a full iron gate and get into the Joko Largo first play. It looks similar to a counter with a Zorhn coming from Schrankhut. The difference being that it is not the cross or the interaction we are systematically after for the rest system to develop. For instance, if we cut into boar tooth instead, we can either void the blow and countercut, or we can deflect the blow and close in. In short, we have several distinct and self-contained options. In fact, having the decision point, which require a fair bit of processing, close to the extreme range is advantageous. So we don't really need the concept of pre-fencing to describe the system.